Welcome back. I'm Peter St. Onge. This is a weekly roundup of my daily videos on the economy and freedom, where I cut through the BS and lay out what the gaslighting clowns pulled out of their hats this week and what is coming next. The Biden administration is handing Donald Trump a lit fuse on a $37 trillion debt bomb, because they've added $12 trillion in debt over the past 4 years, which is more than we added in the first 220 years of our fair republic. In fact, we added $1 trillion in the past 100 days alone, an annual rate of $3.5 trillion in deficit. Now, debt interest is already consuming $1 in $4 you pay in taxes, and it's set to explode to $1.4 trillion. That's interest alone. Last week, more than 36 state financial officers, which is most of them, sent a letter to GOP Speaker Mike Johnson expressing their, quote, grave concerns about the national debt, characterizing it as a, quote, threat to national security. Finally, a security threat that is not imaginary, that is progress. Now, the two big problems debt causes, aside from auctioning our nation for parts, is the stability of our financial system and the progressive replacement of the U.S. dollar as global reserve currency. Both of these are real threats. Our financial system is permanently bankrupt thanks to fractional reserve banking, where they lend money they don't have, paired with standing bailouts from the Fed and Treasury. We saw these last year and, of course, in 2008. At some point, the debt overwhelms it. There's not enough buyers, which sends Treasury rates soaring and destabilizes the entire Ponzi. If it gets bad enough, it threatens the dollar's status as reserve currency, as the most used currency in the world. This reserve status shields Americans from the tens of trillions that the Fed and banking system have pumped out and exported over decades. Those dollars are filling vaults from Saudi Arabia to Beijing, and if they sell, then that money comes flooding home, which would be like a tsunami up a canyon. We could see double-digit inflation for a decade. So what's the solution? Well, the easy fix is Trump's plan to grow the economy with massive deregulation and tax cuts, which spur production. In other words, grow into the debt. The harder part is the cuts. So government spending has an army of powerful cronies and special interests defending it, armed with lawyers and mostly fiery protesters. Considering we've already got a $2 trillion deficit, these cuts would have to be massive just to balance the budget. $2 trillion is about $1 in $3 the federal government spends. Now, $2 trillion will not happen overnight, but simply cutting a couple $100 billion in short order would do wonders to calm financial markets, stabilize the system, and show the world the debt can, in fact, be managed. So what's next? Crony banker Alexander Hamilton once said, national debt is the price of liberty. Of course, he's wrong. Government debt is the price of slavery to an administrative state that fleeces us for cronies. America's richest zip codes surround Washington, D.C., a region unique for producing absolutely nothing. There's no Wall Street, no Silicon Valley, no Hollywood, not even soybeans. It is a barren swamp inhabited by tax bandits who devour the country in a real-world Hunger Games. Balancing the budget is not science fiction. We did do it in 1998 to 2001, when all it took was Bill Clinton reading the room of public opinion and agreeing to Newt Gingrich's limits. Unlike 1998, small government Republicans now have all three branches of government. They have a president who fights, and they have the best minds in the nation in the Department of Government Efficiency. This may be our best last hope to turn off the stove before the frog boils. The Department of Government Efficiency is going straight for the jugular for the exhaust ports on the Death Star. Last week, Elon Musk and Vivek Ramaswamy co-wrote an op-ed in the Wall Street Journal laying out their strategy for radically shrinking the federal government, the unelected occupying army that lords over our fair republic. Beyond auditing the $500 billion in pure waste and fraud, there are two key parts. First is two recent Supreme Court decisions that invalidated nearly the entire administrative state because it was not, in fact, passed by Congress, who is supposed to write all the laws, not just the fun ones. And the second, the long-established precedent that the president can get rid of government workers who are not needed, a so-called reduction in force. Put them together and you get a beautiful three-step process. First, get rid of the unconstitutional regulation that renders the bureaucrats redundant, so assess minimum staffing needs and force reduce away. Then the leftover money reverts to Treasury to cancel out deficit, or dare we dream, pay down debt if greedy Congress things can keep their paws to themselves. I covered in a recent video how the Loper-Bright decision alone renders nearly every single federal regulation unconstitutional, since just 50 of the tens of thousands of rules passed per year are actually authorized by Congress despite having the force of law. The other 99% are unconstitutional. That means DOGE and Trump are simply enacting the will of the Supreme Court, which the rogue Biden administration ignored. So concretely, how will this play out? So DOGE will present Trump a list of regulations that overstep congressional authority, meaning ones that involve major policy decisions without explicit congressional authorization. Trump can then instantly pause enforcement, effectively nullifying the rule, and then do a full review for formal rescission, getting rid of the rule. At which point, if Congress really wants the rules, they are free to pass them in a law, which they will not do for the same reason they never passed it in the first place. So nullifying thousands of rules would rocket fuel the economy, but it would also automatically render tens of thousands of bureaucrats redundant. Trump, being a good steward of the Treasury, can then fire them, and given the federal workers earn six figures with gold-plated benefits, twice the tax-paying plebs, that alone returns billions to taxpayers. But that is just the beginning, because the problem isn't the salaries, the problem is the regulations themselves and the control it gives. So I've covered how regulations massively increase the cost of everything you buy. To illustrate, Biden was proposing rules that would increase the cost of a washing machine by $200, a furnace by $500, an air conditioner by $1,000. They've been piling this crap on for 40 years. One study estimated regulations add $10,000 to the price of a car. Gets worse, a study by the National Association of Manufacturers estimated regulations add $30,000 to the cost of hiring a manufacturing worker. They add $50,000 a year for small manufacturers. So not only does that mean little guys cannot compete, it drives all of them to China. All of that gone with the swipe of a pen. So what's next? Historically, waste and fraud efforts get bogged down in the details and end up cutting a few embarrassing programs, and then they peter out. This time looks very different. Elon and Vivek have correctly identified the thermal exhaust ports of the Death Star, and they're going in. A word from our lead sponsor, Unchained.com. The holidays are coming. It's time to think about your annual IRA contributions. And the IRA is an investment vehicle that can save you a lot of taxes. And with Unchained, you can hold real Bitcoin in your IRA, get access to trading, inheritance, and loans. And it's the only company where you hold the keys and can verify that your Bitcoin is not being relent like banks do. We've seen futures-based ETFs underperform holding your own Bitcoin, so why settle for less? Book a friendly consultation at unchained.com/IRA. If you own gold, you're probably very happy with prices hitting all-time highs. But your gold can do more. It can generate passive income for you. With monetary metals, you earn up to 5% interest on your gold and silver paid in more ounces. Accredited investors can earn double-digit returns in their bond offerings. All interest is paid in ounces of gold and silver stored in your account free of charge. If your metal is gathering dust at home or costing storage fees in a vault, it is time to start putting your metal to work with Monetary Metals. Visit monetary-metals.com/Peter today to learn more. Now back to our show. Left-wing media, or is it leftover media, is in full-blown panic over mass deportations, which are overwhelmingly supported by voters and therefore will happen. Government-funded NPR warns deportation will, quote, destroy the construction industry. Fast Company says it would, quote, cripple California, which is already crippled in many ways. The New York Times conjures a dystopia of Americans being forced to mow their own lawn and, brace yourself, clean your own house. So is it true? Will we have to clean our own hotel rooms? Now, nobody actually knows how many illegal workers there are. That's kind of the point of being undocumented. But the doom porn industry is clustering around an estimate of 6 million from a 2022 study. Add at least another million or two courtesy of Brandon. Breaking it down, they estimate about a quarter, so about 1.5 million, work in construction, another quarter in manufacturing and warehousing, yet another quarter in restaurants, retail, and hotels, and the final quarter in services from landscaping to picking fruit to janitors. Note, what all these jobs have in common is they are overwhelmingly low skill. They take months or even weeks to master. This is not engineers and doctors. This matters because even if we're talking 7 million illegals, there are at least 16 million Americans under the age of 35 who are out of the workforce. They're not working, they're not going to school, they're not doing anything. Many are on government benefits. Many others live with their parents. According to the Census Bureau, the percent of Americans who are 18 to 35 living with their parents just hit the highest since the Great Depression. So why are they living with mom and dad at 30? Because entry-level jobs pay peanuts when you are competing with illegals. One large study in California found the average hourly pay is $30 for native-born Americans. For legal immigrants, it's $28, so almost as good. For green card holders, it's $24, and for illegals, it is $16, which just so happens to be California's minimum wage. So why are illegals so cheap? Because the vast majority are unskilled or even illiterate. That's why they could not get in legally. Also because many are not paying taxes. They're undocumented, after all. Either way, they bring the wages to the floor. In other words, it's not that Americans won't do these jobs, it's that they won't do these jobs for minimum wage. Keep in mind, a lot of these jobs are hard work, so picking fruit in the hot sun, carrying slabs of sod, sweating in a factory for minimum wage is no way to tempt basement-dwelling 25-year-olds into the labor force. So going back to the doom porn, nobody is crippled because we don't lose the work. The fruit is still picked, the factory is still humming, the hotel rooms sparkle. We simply do it with American workers who would otherwise be idle. So what's next? The leftover media will keep pumping out deportation fear porn, and the economy will be just fine. Blue collars will just have jobs that actually pay. Yes, this will boost costs, but in return, houses get cheaper, empty houses lower prices. You'll be able to go to the hospital or find a specialist without waiting in line behind an illegal who has never paid a dime into Medicaid. And of course, government spending plunges as millions of welfare cases go home while millions more get off mom and dad's couch and go to work. Will we have a Bitcoin strategic reserve, or has Donald Trump been smoking the wacky tobacco? During his campaign, Trump floated the idea of establishing a Bitcoin strategic reserve where the federal government would amass Bitcoin like they amass oil and gold. So will it happen, and what is it? So the federal government currently stockpiles all kinds of resources. Most are useful things we might need during a war, like oil or medicines. The biggest is the Strategic Petroleum Reserve, which holds 350 million barrels of oil, so the ambulances can run even if we're embargoed or Houston is nuked because Joe Biden's handlers started World War III again. The other kind of reserve is not about war, it's a backup to paper money. The biggest is the 261 million ounces of pure gold owned by the Department of Treasury, which is currently worth $700 billion. This is effectively an insurance policy in case they screw the hyperinflation pooch. And that's where Bitcoin Reserve comes in. It too would act as an insurance policy, this time for digital gold, with a few added benefits. So first, while gold prices go up, more accurately, the US dollar goes down, Bitcoin prices happen to go up a lot. Over the past 10 years, gold prices have gone up about 8% per year. Bitcoin went up about 73% per year. So if we had, say, $100 billion in Bitcoin growing at 73% a year on top of $700 billion in gold growing at 8%, you can actually start thinking about a backed dollar. The other benefit, of course, is a clear signal that the federal government is not going to try to stop Americans from using Bitcoin. This matters because Bitcoin basically is gold for anybody under the age of 50, because it's immune from government, because it's hard to pay the phone bill with gold coins. So concretely, how would it work? In July, Senator Cynthia Lummis proposed the Bitcoin Act of 2024, which would direct Treasury to buy 1 million Bitcoins over a 5-year period. It's about 5% of all Bitcoins in existence. Presumably, you'd also toss in the 7 billion of seized Bitcoins the feds are hodling. Like today's gold reserves, the Bitcoin would be owned by the Department of Treasury with decentralized cold storage. In other words, it wouldn't be connected to the internet. It would have to be held for 20 years before the crack addicts in Congress can touch it, with the intention of ultimately paying off a hunk of the national debt, potentially trillions. Instead of deficits, Lummis proposes buying it mainly using Federal Reserve remittances. In other words, the money the Fed pays Treasury for the privilege of counterfeiting. Of course, this is challenging in the short run since the Fed lost $200 billion under Jerome Powell, so there are no remittances for a while. Still, eventually the Fed will be back in black since printing money is fantastically profitable. So what's next? It's been a wild ride watching Bitcoin go from fringe gold bug obsession to potentially being stockpiled by the most powerful country in the world. At worst, we pay down a couple trillion in debt. At best, we take a big step to actually backing the dollar, to ending the long nightmare of paper money, the wars, lockdowns, the boom-bust inflation, and recessions it leaves in its wake. A word from our sponsor. If you run a business and want to get customers excited about your loyalty and rewards program, you can now implement Bitcoin rewards with Oshi Loyalty. You get all the perks of a full-featured loyalty and reward program with real Bitcoin rewards every time your customers shop, refer, and engage. Boost customer retention, loyalty, and lifetime value. And if you're looking for Bitcoin rewards when you shop, check out the dozens of companies in the Oshi marketplace at Oshi, that's OSHI.tech/shop. Start earning Bitcoin today. Now back to our show. How should we end the Fed? Without a government-licensed counterfeiter, would we be eating the cat food? There's an entire industry dedicated to pumping out fear, uncertainty, and doubt of the post-apocalyptic dystopia that would descend upon the fair republic if we cancel the Fed's counterfeiting license. So what would actually happen? First things, it's not science fiction. America did not have a central bank for its first 140 years. We had air conditioning, telephones, and electric cars before we had a Fed. Moreover, there are countries today that still do not have a central bank, 7 of them, 8 if Argentina joins the party. So what would it take and what would happen next? So there's 2 parts to ending the Fed, the legal nuts and bolts and what happens to the economy. Legally, it's embarrassingly simple. You repeal the Federal Reserve Act. It's debatable whether that would take 50 or 60 senators. Make a very good case it's budget-related, in which case it's 50 and the Republicans can do it in, about 3 weeks. So legally, it would take about 10 minutes. What about the economy? So 3 main functions of a central bank are bailing out banks, policing fraud, and manipulating interest rates to make money artificially cheap, above all for the government. Bailouts, of course, are deeply unpopular and should not be happening in a democracy. Policing fraud, they singularly fail at. So Silicon Valley Bank literally had a Fed official on their board, while Sam Bankman-Fried was having coffee with regulators while Bitcoiners were exposing his fraud. As for manipulating interest rates, it's wholesale swindle, robbing the poor, paying the rich. With inflation and recession as side effects, markets have set interest rates for thousands of years without a central bank. They don't need manipulation. So ideally, you would toss all 3. The only one you would need to be careful about on timing is the bailouts, because our financial system is structurally bankrupt, specifically because it expects bailouts. So we saw this in 2008 when George Bush refused to bail out Lehman, sending Wall Street off the cliff. Still, 3 years warning that bailouts are ending should do it compact enough to fit in a single presidential term. Finally, what happens to the dollar without a Fed? Well, you can do it 2 ways. So you keep paper dollars as a kind of in-game token for the American economy, either printing them at Treasury, in which case they replace taxes, or not printing them, leading to deflation as the economy grows, while the money does not. This helps the poor, but it also makes debts bigger. So even better is gold, specifically offer the 261 million ounces of gold in the Treasury to the public at the current market price, say $2,600 an ounce, and then passing a law saying if the public is buying gold, in other words, if there's inflation, Treasury has to buy back fresh gold on the open market before it pays bankers a single dime of interest on the debt. This effectively turns Wall Street into human shields, because if the Fed spend too much creating inflation, the bankers don't get paid. It turns the bankers into inflation enforcers. Elegant, incentive-aligned, corruption-resistant, should have done it yesterday. So what's next? Ending the Fed would be the greatest economic achievement in a century. It would end inflation, would end recessions, it would shrink the federal government, and stop the systemic pillaging of the middle class and the productive economy by Wall Street. And it is embarrassingly easy. Thanks for tuning in. Remember to subscribe so you don't miss an episode, and go to petersanons.com for daily videos and in-depth articles with charts and all the gory details. Okay, we'll be watching. See you next time.